So this interview will be about 30 to 45 minutes. We will be giving questions that came from our YouTube channel subscribers, and it is going live right now. And everyone who has a question can ask it in the comments section, so we will give it. I will start by giving some questions. The first question. So, what inspired you to pursue career in environmental sciences?
I was a university student the same way you are today. I was a student during the time of the first ecological environmental awakening in the United States. And I was an undergraduate, a bachelor student, during the year of the first Earth Day. And I was studying biological sciences, but then I took a course in sort of modern ecology. And with that course, I was able to participate in 2 summer field projects back in the U.S. The first one was in the mountains in Colorado, and the second one was another summer in Costa Rica, where we were beginning studies that came to be known as biodiversity, which I am teaching here in my sustainable development course, in fact. So it was my experiences as a bachelor student in natural sciences during the time of the first environmental consciousness, environmental movement in the U.S.
Thank you so much for answering. Yes, of course, I got a motivation from you to pursue also career in this field. So we ask our technology part to come a little bit here, our team, okay? And I will be giving next question. So what are some challenges and potential drawbacks of using technology in sustainable development?
Well, I always like to tell people that technology isn't good or bad. It's how we use technologies. And in fact, yesterday in one of our seminars, I was asked about genetic modification. Is this good or is it bad? And that was my exact answer, was how are we using it? Are we using it to increase productivity of agriculture so we can feed more people? Or are we using it in different ways that don't help people? And GMOs have been used to improve nutrition in some varieties. Sometimes they're used in a way just to allow for more production without thinking about food quality. So technology, though, will be very important. And in this country, the greater adoption of efficient irrigation technologies will benefit from the use of smarter technologies. Advanced drip irrigation systems around the world, they often have sensors which can detect exact amounts of moisture in the plant's growing environment, and then can automatically turn on, turn off the water flows. So we have 8 billion people on this earth currently, and for me, I find it difficult to believe that we can grow sustainably, improve lives sustainably without the use of some of these modern technologies.
Thank you so much. Yes, of course, smart agriculture is also important for the cool world. And the next question is come from our subscriber, Afrobek. Okay. How was your experience as Fulbright scholar to the National University of Uzbekistan, Tashkent, affected your view of environmental capacity building?
Well, my experience then as Fulbright scholar and my other experiences around this country in general, they've motivated me in many ways to be somebody who returns to this country. Because what I'm trying to do is build more connections with the wider scientific world, with students and faculty here in this country, some of whom have not had the same chances and opportunities they would have had if they were in Europe, China, U.S., to be part of a global system of environmental science. And students who are eager to learn better understand where there are available sources of important information. So I'm personally very committed to higher education, but I'm also committed to improving environmental quality.
Thank you so much. Yes, of course, we are so happy to have you in Uzbekistan, and every university also happy to invite you. And we will use, of course, our knowledge to make a positive impact, not only in Uzbekistan, but also the full world. So the next question comes from Hassan. What challenges have you encountered while teaching courses on environmental risk assessment and climate science and risk?
Well, in general, not just here in Uzbekistan, trying to help people learn sort of more objectively about what the nature of the problems are. We all want a cleaner environment. We all want sustainable development. We all want a climate we can live with. But there are many choices to be made when we're making policies to protect the environment, to protect our future and improve our future. And so we have to make sure we're being analytical and thinking very carefully about the nature of the problem, and not just being emotional, saying we have to do this, we have to do that. It's a complex world, and what we have found in the U.S. is we're more quantitative and analytical, we can make better choices in how we move forward in improving the environment. So that's a challenge, and it's a challenge everywhere, but more analytical skills, which is one of the, I think, the types of skills that this university is trying to give its students.
Thank you so much. What particular aspect of air pollution and health do you focus on your research?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is not my original idea, but you can read about it clearly on the website of the World Health Organization. Particulate matter is the most common pollutant that people are exposed to everywhere in the world. And in sort of the modern way we measure particulate air pollution, it's what we call PM, particulate matter 2.5. This is a measure of the diameter of the particle. And these are extremely small particles. And defining concentrations of PM 2.5 and how much people are actually exposed to is one of the critical pieces for understanding the effects. PM 2.5 is associated with a number of disease types, more than most people would have understood. And so we need to know what are the concentrations where large amounts of people live and what are the health effects. And there are typically some serious health effects. There are respiratory diseases, but not just respiratory diseases. It's associated with heart diseases and stroke. So we need to get good measurements, and we need to develop approaches to reducing air pollution. In fact, I was just showing one of my colleagues here a map, a worldwide map of the air quality index. And one of the things we need to do in this country is to have more data that is available to everybody. So there are online maps of monitors all over the world. There are some here, but we need more so people can understand the situation. But PM 2.5 is the one pollutant in the world that harms more people than any other pollutant, because we virtually all breathe air that has some of this contamination. It's less in some parts of the world. It is much cleaner in the United States.
Thank you. As our startup team members are associated with robotics and also sustainable development, one of our subscribers asked this question. So, how can robotics and technology be used to promote sustainable development?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I will make a few suggestions, but I'm hoping that your generation will have better answers. But if you look across industries in the world, there is a trend towards more and more automation. So this tells us that robotics are being used in more and more industrial sectors. And among the reasons, of course, it saves money on labor costs, but the production process becomes more energy efficient because robots can operate perfectly. And so the use of robotics to reduce energy and material use is one way. And I think currently it's more energy use, but I'm not an expert on industrial production, but anything that improves the efficiency, particularly energy efficiency of industrial production, is making a contribution. And I think we don't know yet all the ways that robotics will change the way we live. There's probably going on quietly the way many of these technological revolutions take place. I remember recently seeing a robot that was vacuuming or cleaning the floors. I don't know about that in terms of sustainable development, but that's a signal to the extent to which robotics are increasing their role in our societies.
Yes, of course. Also, we will try to use robotics technologies in sustainable development in other spheres, also in Uzbekistan, because it's very important to develop it, of course, as you know, in countries like America, the robotics engineering, mechanical engineering is developed, and if we use those skills also in Uzbekistan, it will prosper.
So I think the question actually should end up being a slightly broader question, because what we see with robotics is also the adoption of artificial intelligence, and they're working together. So I don't think we know all the places we're going. But another example that could contribute to energy efficiency is this possibility that AI coupled with automation technologies in use of trucks. You can have, say, in a country like the U.S. where we have very long highways, and the trucks don't need to make any turns, that convoys of trucks could be driving across the country with fewer drivers involved, more even speeds, which means they would be more efficient in their use of fuel, and only use the person when we get to the smaller areas where an intelligent driver needs to be there. So there are probably all sorts of possibilities that will be emerging soon.
Thank you so much. One of our subscribers wrote that he got a great motivation from you because for the past years he worked in different parts of the world, and he is asking, what was your most memorable experience while lecturing at 8 regional universities across Uzbekistan?
Well, I had many different wonderful experiences, but what I like to say is that my experience as a lecturer, my experience seeing these different parts of Uzbekistan at the same time are all mixed together. But I'm always just very happy to meet students who are eager to learn something new, and particularly about our field of environment. So, and always getting at least a few interesting questions, getting to meet some of the faculty who know so much about the details of these places, learning so much from them. And then also it's just been part of getting to know your country in a way that many people don't have the opportunity. Because when I go visit a university, I'm not just being a tourist, I'm sort of participating in the educational life and some local life. I get shown around, so it's been wonderful to me. Connecting to students, and just last night I was having an online conversation with someone who will be finishing their doctorate in STEM English teaching at Oregon. And so these connections stay and they grow, and they're very, I think, gratifying for both sides.
Yes, of course. How do different regions respond to environmental issues differently?
Well, you know, most regions, whether they're Uzbekistan or the U.S. or any, basically any country, the regions have their sort of the fundamentals of their economy. And when we suggest things that maybe they will have to make some big adjustments, and they're concerned about how that affects the local economy, we can see that different parts of the world respond differently. For example, in the U.S., even though we use much less coal for energy than we used to, we still have some regions where coal mining and the use of coal for electricity is still important. Those regions do not respond well to suggestions about environmental change to improve the environment. Other regions of the U.S., then, they're very eager to move to green energy production. And I think you would see similar things here in this country. You have some industrial cities and regions, you have some very agricultural ones, and they need to maintain their income and their prosperity. And so if we're going to recommend, or even sort of through policies, somewhat force them to change, we need to make sure they can continue to prosper. And that's really much of the philosophy of sustainable development, is continued growth, but continued prosperity without damage to our future.
What kind of problems related to sustainable development are in Uzbekistan, and what are some ways to solve them?
Well, I think many people would agree that the sustainable development issue in this country, one of the major ones, is what sustainable agriculture will be. And in particular, because of the warming climate and the changing water resources, how can we successfully manage water resources for this country in general and for agriculture in particular? Clearly, the glaciers and the high mountains, particularly Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which is the source of so much of the water here, those glaciers are declining in volume. Nonetheless, what in first sets of data we have about precipitation, the amount of yearly precipitation does not seem to be changing from some of the data we have in Central Asia. We need much more data. But it seems like there are some indication that like in much of the world, precipitation events are becoming more extreme. And of course, that by itself is difficult to manage for agriculture. But if we're still getting the same volume of water, though, we will need different water infrastructure forms. We may need new ways of storing more water in this country so it's available when it's needed. And we've already talked about this a little in the context of smart technology, but irrigation in this country and in Central Asia needs to become more efficient. There are different approaches to it, but the traditional flooding irrigation, we need to move beyond that. And there's been interesting work going on in this country for quite a number of years now, funded by different organizations around the world. Some of it's looking at costs of the transition to drip irrigation, but not only that, but the lining of the irrigation canals with plastic so you don't have all this seepage in the canals themselves before they even get to the fields of the crops. So water management is really one of the key issues of sustainable development in this country, and particularly for agriculture. If we have good data, and we have good modeling, and we have good thinking about the future, I think we can adapt. But yet the basis of good climate adaptation is good information and being flexible as we move into the future about what we do.
Thank you so much. How was your experience as an adjunct professor and visiting professor shaped your perspective on environmental education?
You mean here in Uzbekistan Environmental Protection Agency when I began teaching. And at the same time, I was being invited to be a visiting professor first in Kazakhstan before I even got to Uzbekistan. And probably some of the first things I learned, I've spoken a little bit about this at first, but I did not need to be a sort of a pure fundamental research scientist. I had to help students understand the consequences of pollution, of climate change on the world that you will be inheriting. So I spoke about the need for data, the need for good analytical approaches to understanding the world. And so I think that was one of my initial sort of insights, was how to make thinking about the environment not just about today, but about the longer term, and how to do it analytically in a way that could contribute to problem solving, which I think that's why we're doing this.
Thank you. So, what do you consider the most pressing environmental issue of our time?
Well, I think over the long haul, it's climate change, which affects every country in different ways. Here, I've spoken a number of times about water resource management. But additionally, the summers in this country are already extremely hot, and they're going to be hotter. So other aspects of agricultural management have to account for ever-warming soils. But I've also spoken a little bit about air pollution. I can often not say there's only one global issue, but air pollution and energy use are tied so closely together that for the sake of people's health, to reduce the premature, the early mortality of people for instance, in Uzbekistan, in this region, we need to reduce the air pollution. And we can do that at the same time we're transitioning to green energy, reducing the use of fossil fuels, particularly coal, and replacing it with more and more alternative green energies that do not have either carbon emissions and they have no polluting emissions. One nice thing about Tashkent, it could be worse, but many of your cars run on methane, which is not as polluting as regular gasoline. But if you look across the U.S., and our air is quite clean for an industrialized country, but nonetheless, climate change affects us also. I've lived in the coastal zones in the U.S., particularly the state of Louisiana, which is very low lying, and the hurricanes are causing more damage. And one of the things that we need to do in the U.S. is change the way we permit development along the coastlines, because the hurricanes have been bringing more and more precipitation. We also have parts of the U.S. which kind of are similar in climate and ecosystems to Uzbekistan. And these are areas that are extremely dry already and seem to be getting drier, and we have to sort of understand how we can use these lands in the future. We've been having forest fire problems at a scale that we did not used to, and in some parts of the country, we're having these droughts, just extended periods with very, very little rainfall. So it depends on the country, but every country is having some changes due to climate. So it becomes, can we reduce enough of our greenhouse gas emissions so the rise in temperature is moderated? That will give us much more time to understand how we need to adapt, what kinds of new infrastructure we need, and then to start building that infrastructure. But the rise of the ocean, the sea level rise, is a major issue for the United States because we're surrounded on three sides by ocean. But that's not an issue here in Uzbekistan.
Of course. Thank you, and we will ask our technology department to slide to the next slide. And we see that many people also joined our YouTube live video, so we would like to say that also for them, for new people who joined us, Professor Dr. Michael Brody is an environmental scientist who has great ideas for projects and research, and we are so happy to have interviewed Dr. Michael Brody, got a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin, and it's in the United States of America. He has a broad range of working experience, not only in America but also in Uzbekistan, across Uzbekistan, regional universities here in Tashkent. Also, Professor got the master's degree from the University of Michigan.
Bachelor's degree.
Bachelor's degree, sorry. And our subscribers are giving the next questions. So, in reading the Global Environmental Issues class at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, what was your biggest takeaway?
That was the first time that Lehigh in their summer program had a segment on environmental issues. These were mainly students who were interested in business and politics. And I no longer remember what year it was, but I think one of the unfortunate aspects, these were students coming from all around the world, and they had not yet had a chance to understand how the global environment interacts with what they want to do. And so I was struck that I had a group of students that had not yet had any introduction to these issues. But I know by now that program has been changing. They came for different reasons, and the faculty at Lehigh that ran that program were interested in trying to set some new direction. So I gave them a lot of credit for having done this. But the students weren't quite ready then. The students here are far ready than those students were. So that's, I think, something important to understand. It's not like U.S. students are always ahead of everybody else, or students from everywhere else in the world are always ahead of Uzbek students, because they're not. Because you're young and curious and eager to learn. So.
Yeah, thank you. So what advice would you give to young people who are considering a career in environmental science?
Well, part of my advice I would give to any young person, which is you need to study hard. Okay? You need to learn how to read scientific journals. You need to learn how to think about what you read. And you need to learn how to write. And eventually, you need to learn how to do research, which means collecting new data, interacting with colleagues, and learning how to publish. And this particular advice is not any different for environmental science than for some aspect of physics or chemistry. But the biggest difference in the environmental sciences is how interdisciplinary we need to be to actually solve problems. So most environmental problems they may have biological aspects, they may have geographical, geological, agricultural, but so it's difficult to solve local problems just with one discipline. And then, this has always been difficult for pure scientists anywhere, is that you need some economic types of thinking as part of any environmental science project where you're looking to solve a problem. Because you have to pay for things, you have to know whether these things will be beneficial and to what extent. So I think one of the things that distinguishes what a person who's interested in environmental science needs to do beyond the basic learning how to study and learn in your discipline is to accept that the solution to problems is multidisciplinary, which also means that the understanding of problems at these global scales is also multidisciplinary. So this sort of being able to work with other disciplines and groups, I think, is very important in a way that it was not when I was getting started.
Thank you. Some of our subscribers who are watching this live interview are studying and interested to study bachelor's degree, master's degree in the United States. So, can you share please about your experience at the University of Michigan and about your master's degree?
Okay. I have a bachelor's degree and a PhD. I did not stop to get a master's. So I think there's a couple of things you have to understand, which is that when you get to the U.S., if you want to study, particularly in the sciences, you will have a lot of work to do. You will have time to relax and to have fun, but the modern sciences, you spend a lot of time first reading, and then you spend a lot of time in laboratories, or you spend a lot of time collecting data out in the field. And in agriculture, of course, you need data from not just greenhouses and laboratories, but you need data from actual big agricultural farms, enterprises. So you have to understand that your learning process, your development process, will entail a lot of different aspects. The other aspect that people need to understand if they really, really think they want to go to the U.S. To study is that it's difficult to get there. And you, as my interviewer, we met at the Education USA space at the U.S. Embassy. Our universities tend to be very expensive. We don't always have a lot of scholarships. We often have some. So the first thing any young person needs to do, if they really want to study in the U.S., to be realistic about it, is start learning about which universities are good for what you as an individual want to study. And at our embassies around the world, we have libraries, we have employees in this program called Education USA, and they will help guide you to help identify universities that are appropriate for you. We are a big country, we have maybe 10 times the population, and we have, I don't know how many thousands of universities. And they're not all equally good for all types of study. So you have a lot of homework to do if you want to go to the U.S.
Thank you so much, Dave. One of the last questions. How was the agricultural sphere in Uzbekistan 10 years ago, and how it developed?
Well, actually, in one of my lectures soon, I will show some data on how agriculture is changing in this country. The changes in this country are complicated because it isn't just agriculture, but it's been the whole process of the transition from communism to at least a partial free market. Some people refer to this as the decollectivization of agriculture in former Soviet republics. And so there are all sorts of issues of land ownership, freedom to grow what you want to grow. And this has been changing steadily. And then you have to kind of understand also the role of specific crops in the economy. Because cotton has always been a big, big crop for this country. And it has been a source of a lot of income, thanks to the export of what used to be mainly raw cotton. So sticking to cotton for a minute is that the country is trying to get more value out of cotton. So instead of just growing lots and lots, I mean, one of the biggest cotton producers in the world, I'm not sure the ranking today, but Uzbekistan is trying to do what we call move up the value chain. So maybe grow less cotton overall, export less, but develop a textile industry. So you can not just export raw cotton, but you can export clothing, and so, which is higher value. There's more value as you add technology and knowledge and learning to what you produce and then sell. So that's been a change. Seems to be a growth in certain fruit crops in terms of their production. So there are a lot of changes going on. And the last 10 years in particular, I think, is when some of the emphasis on reducing just the volume of cotton production, trying to, when I was here during my Fulbright scholarship, I gave some lectures at the Textile Institute, and by chance, not long after I did that, they were having a fashion show. And so they're they had been bringing in some European designers to help develop a design industry here, and then they were showing off some of the clothing, but not just from Uzbek designers, but from other designers. So that was definitely something that was new and is now growing, and that's a fairly big difference, I believe.
Thank you so much. Yes, of course. We in Uzbekistan are so happy to have a professor like you, and in the future we will be trying to develop the agricultural sphere in Uzbekistan. Thank you so much for coming to this interview and taking the time.
Well, you're quite welcome, and I'd like to thank this university for offering me the opportunity to be here. I think this is a really nice mix of foreign and Uzbek faculty. So I think this university has a lot of potential, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to help at its earlier years. So thank you for the interview.
Thank you so much. Now we will take one more.